We've got two very important Senate runoff elections happening in just a few weeks in Georgia. And if you watched the debates that just happened, not looking great for the Republicans necessarily. One didn't even show up, and the other looks like a poorly developed robot. But that doesn't mean that the Republicans don't have a strategy, and it's the same one as always. They're gonna make it as tough to vote as possible. In Cobb County, the state's third most populous county with more than 760,000 residents, election officials have announced 5 early voting locations, fewer than half of the 11 used for early voting in the election that just ended 1 month ago. See, because Georgia, like, I don't know if you've been following this, a lot of people voted in Georgia, and it turns out when a lot of people vote, the state can flip to blue. So can't have that. We need to cut those polling places. In an interview with the Washington Post, Cobb County Elections Director Janine Evler said she didn't have the staff to run more early voting sites, which that might well be true. The thing is, staff could be available if the state cared enough to actually pay for it, but like that just leads to more people voting. And in particular in Cobb County, we don't want that. And bear in mind, a lot of people apparently want to vote in this runoff election. Nearly 1 million voters have already requested mail-in ballots for the runoff election, according to election officials. About 1.3 million mail-in votes were cast in November's general election, which Biden led by about a 400,000 vote margin. I mean, that is pretty amazing. We still have time, and it's close to the number for the presidential election. Yeah. If you're a Republican Georgia, JR, that has gotta be terrifying you.
Well, they know, that's the thing. So, I mean, again, we just mentioned how, they want Red Lobster in the Olive Garden to open up so you can sit inside and have your unlimited breadsticks. But they don't want to have enough election sites or election officials hired to run this election correctly. I think we find out where the priorities are. Chicken Alfredo, as you mentioned, is definitely up on the list, but voting is definitely not.
Yeah, voting sauce just isn't delectable enough, I guess. Democracy, it doesn't do it for them. And so look, obviously as a result of this, a lot of people are worried about the voter suppression, and in particular, how it is going to affect in Georgia, especially people of color. With a group of advocates, including Georgia branches of the NAACP and the American Civil Liberties Union, writing a letter to local officials saying, we are especially concerned that these closures will be harmful to Cobb County's Black and Latinx voters because many of the locations are in Black and Latinx communities. That is going to be a shocker to the election officials in Georgia. When they find out that they potentially suppressing Black and Latinx voters, like that's not their intention, not at all, not at all. And take a look at this as we continue. You can see this Cobb County advanced voting sites, and you can see this sort of demographic breakdown on the right there. But this isn't new, man. In Georgia a couple years ago, they removed so many polling places. That was Brian Kemp. That was how he got elected, was by doing that. Why wouldn't they double down on that?
Let's not forget, the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act several years ago, and then a year after that, the Congress was trying to pass laws to help strengthen it again. And I remember Democrats were trying to push for this, and Republicans were absolutely not on board. And they said specifically, this is a bipartisan legislation proposal, by the way. They specifically were saying it's not needed. The Voting Rights Act is just fine. No one needs to do this anymore. And also, it's outdated in the way that they do it. So let's point out really fast. It was the Section 5, reactivate this Section 5, this provision of the Voting Rights Act. And what they would do is they would make states that have a history of suppressing people's votes, specifically, of course, minorities and disenfranchised communities. Those states that generally do that, anytime they have a change, they have to get this approved, because many times the changes, as we're seeing right now in Georgia, are designed specifically to disenfranchise particular specific voters so that you can win. Obvious on top of obvious. We know how this works. Now, again, this was 2014. Donald Trump was not president. This is the same Republican Party that has been doing this since the beginning. He just walked in and said, the Republican Party is like fresh and ready for me to come in and just invade and use at my will, because they're not for any kind of actual election security or any democracy. Why would they care about that? This is perfect for me. This party was tailor-made for Donald Trump to come in and become the dictator of it.
Yep. So you mentioned 2013 when the Voting Rights Act was taken out. In the aftermath of that, Georgia shut down 200 polling sites
immediately.
And I want to put that in perspective. The early voting sites they're setting up for Cobb County is 5, third most populous county. So maybe they could have used those extra 200. By the way, and so we're comparing the 5 to, for instance, for Cobb County, the 11 that they had during the election that we just had a month ago. I don't want you to believe that like it was good then. There were hours-long lines for early voting with the 11. Some voters had to wait up to 10 hours to vote. And now they cut it by more than a half. I really hope, I mean, everybody knows the stakes. That's why they're doing this. I hope that the voters, it's gonna be so much tougher when it's not a presidential race. I mean, to stand in line for 3 or 5 or 10 hours is so tough, but I really hope that people do.
The motivation for them to do it has to be presented, and that's the hard part. Because again, it's December, bro. It's January when they're gonna run it, right? So again, it's the middle of the winter. There's issues with standing outside and waiting for 10 hours in line. No one wants to do that. That's what they're banking on.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to another.
Why mail-in is something that's completely against their beliefs, because that makes
exactly. And by the way, if you can't afford to have the staff, then do the mail-in voting. You can have machines process them and all of that. It can just be drop off. It requires far less staff actually on hand.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.